So welcome to the 4th Annual Level Ground Festival. I'm here with Anna Marie Cox, and I am so excited that you're here, so grateful that you joined us. And I have been listening to all the episodes of With Friends Like These, and when I first heard about it on Pod Save America, I was just so intrigued and excited because I think the posture that you have and your intention is so much in line with what we've been trying to do at Level Ground for so long. So I'm wondering if, I know you've talked about it on the show, but if you could just tell people kind of how you ended up in this space, wanting to do this, a little like origin story for us.
Well, I mean, in a way, my entire life has been leading up to this, which sounds like really dramatic,
Yeah.
but in a way, like I really feel like it has, because I can pick out several things about my journey to this particular place that have to do with like my family and my faith and my recovery, and I'm in long-term recovery, which may be a good place to start because, you know, in that space, like you're taught, whether you like it or not, that you need to listen to people you don't agree with, and that you need to pray for people that you resent. And there's a lot of emphasis on, if I'm upset by something, it's something in me that's upsetting me.
Yeah.
It's not the other person that's upsetting me.
It's a mirror.
It's a mirror,
Yeah.
and I need to like figure out like why it is that like it's upsetting me. And like that's a somewhat familiar thing to think. People probably heard that before.
Yeah.
But I actually had to put it into practice. And you know, I think that sort of changed. I've always been, you know, something of a conversationalist because I'm a journalist. But I think over the last few years, I've had to get better at listening. And, you know, then the election happened. And, you know, in a way, like I hate the term silver lining. I really do. But I think that I've just tried to be conscious of the way that if things had turned out a different way, I would not be so interested in listening, I think, as part of my, you know, function as a job. You know, it would have stayed more like, oh, it's a thing I do for myself and my practice, whatever. But I started to think, like, this is something I really can apply to the national scene, like, to this moment in American culture where we've become aware of just how vast the gulf is between us.
How much we're missing each other.
And, you know, everyone should note that gulf would have been there no matter who won the presidential election. So it's good that we have to face it. Like, I just want to differentiate between it's a good thing that happened and it's good that we have to face this thing that exists.
Yeah.
So, yeah. That's a long answer. But.
No, I think that is really great. When we first started Level Ground 5 years ago, the question on my mind was, is different a good idea? Like, is this a good idea that we're even trying to do this? And I think that the question for me has shifted. It doesn't matter if it's a good idea anymore. I think the question is, how do we do it? And so I'm wondering how many episodes are there? Six. Okay. So in even 6 episodes, I've noticed some subtle changes, and I'm wondering what you're learning about how do you create this space for conversation across difference and disagreement. I know you've talked a lot too about this is maybe a conversation we should have not with our families or the people closest to us, but with people that the stakes aren't maybe as high.
Right.
So yeah, just like what have you learned about how to do that, and how has it changed maybe the show?
Well, I think the first thing I want to address is the people see that we have a logo for the show that has like George Washington with a pussy hat and George Washington with a MAGA hat. And that is definitely like the preeminent difference in our time right now. But the show's about a lot of other kinds of difference. And each show sort of addresses it so far in kind of a different way. You know, I have done a couple shows interviewing conservatives, but I also did a show with a friend of mine who is black, and I almost said happens to be black, but the reason he's on the show is because he's my black friend. And we talked about being the black friend, and what that means for him, and what does it mean for him to know that I'm aware of that, right? And that was, I have to say, like one incredibly rewarding conversation for me selfishly. I think it was helpful to other people. And I also did a show about disability rights. In which, like, we just asked the question, like, what is it that's different about disability rights than other civil rights movements? What's the same? And what is ableism? And what is, like, there's a movement now called Crip the Vote, and we talked about that, and, like, taking back the word crip, for instance.
Yep. I knew nothing about that until I listened to the show, actually.
It was an amazing episode,
I thought it was amazing.
And so, the framework is very loose and allows me to do a lot of different kinds of things.
Yeah.
But the main thing I think every show has in common is sort of, if I had to use a catchphrase, is how politics, affect relationships and how relationships affect politics. Because in the end, like, each show really is about an individual relationship.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And have you seen, and I know you talk about your relationship with your husband, have you seen how this has impacted your individual relationships outside the show?
At some point, he's going to have to come on.
Yeah,
I'm thinking maybe like the 100th episode, because I do talk about him a lot. So the backstory is that when we met, he was a Republican, and now he's not. He did ask me recently about registering as a Democrat, but I'm not gonna
not ready to
he's like Democrat curious. And his journey has been really instructive and interesting for me, because I stayed out of trying to change his mind, which is again sort of something I'm trying to bring to the show. Yeah. Like, we thought about politics a lot when we first met, and had to realize that just wasn't going to be fruitful. Because, like you said, I say this a lot on the show, which is that if you're talking about politics with someone you love, you're always talking about more than politics. You're talking about the relationship too. And I think for two people who might have strong personalities and yet also incredibly sensitive to abandonment, like, you can have an argument with that, like that fear of, like, what does this mean for us coming up? So we just let it go, and then a lot of things happened in the past 4 years, I think he deserves to have his own voice about this. So I try to just stay sort of like on what I've observed.
Yeah.
And it really has just been about, if you live your values, that is the best argument you can make to anyone about what you believe. And I do think that for my husband, who just hadn't been exposed to a lot of ideas, he grew up in a fairly conservative family, I think just seeing me go through the decisions that I make was helpful to him in figuring out where he wanted to be.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I like how you talk about that you had to let go of him changing, which is that, like, letting go is obviously incredibly difficult, but it isn't about the result.
Right.
That when we let go, there's always some kind of transformation that's happening. And I always talk about my mom, would have said, anybody who voted for Mitt Romney is a bad person, full stop. And I think in having experiences that humanize people who voted for Mitt Romney or whatever, that
Interesting you choose Mitt Romney, which is like, what's the matter with him?
Right. Well, this was at the time.
Right.
A different world. But that it's not going to change the way that she votes, but it changes the way that she thinks about people who vote that way. Or, so that there's change is a sticky word that is maybe triggering sometimes, but I think there's transformation when we're able to let go of the outcomes.
And remember, the catchphrase I try to always remember is that if you change in a relationship, the relationship changes.
Yeah.
So letting go for the relationship I had with my husband was like a change of the relationship already.
Yeah.
And if you've listened to me before, you know this, but one of the things that does is allow you to speak on level ground, right? Like, because if you're not trying to change somebody's mind, like, if you don't have an agenda in your conversations, there's no power differential.
Yeah.
And that's the way someone can really truly hear. You can hear, and the other person can hear.
One of the pushbacks we get a lot with Level Ground is that it is, or is it possible to not have an agenda? What do you think about that?
I think it's possible to not I would say there's a difference between having an agenda and letting go of changing people.
Yeah.
I don't think it's possible to not have an agenda. I think we live our lives with an agenda, and we live our lives with direction. And so even if you don't have a political agenda, like you have a direction you're going, and if you're living your values, like that's a form of an agenda.
Yeah.
But you can let go of trying to get people to agree with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe the thing that people should focus on.
Yeah. It's a subtle distinction, but I think it's a significant one.
I think so. I think again, like that's what creates the ability for everyone to have an open mind, hopefully.
Yeah.
Like, and then after an open mind comes an open heart.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. All these cliches
I
that
know.
end up being true. I know also that you have written about being a Christian. And a lot of the people who are part of starting Level Ground went to Fuller Seminary and have studied theology. But I would not say that our that Level Ground as an organization is driven towards that agenda, but certainly our faith, or the way that our theology has taught us to see the world, has impacted this space that we're talking about.
Again, I would hope so.
Yeah, right. It's impossible for it not to,
Yeah.
I think. But yeah, just wanted to give you space maybe to make any sort of comment about how your spiritual or faith life has sort of influenced your desire to find this space.
Yeah, I sort of left that out of the first answer, although it's definitely there. I believe in the commandment to love, and that's like, first commandment is to love God, and then the second is to love our neighbors and our enemies and whoever it is that comes in our path. And again, this election challenged me on that in a real way, because my husband's family, as I said, is actually still very conservative, and I love them, and they love me, and yet we disagree, and that disagreement has I've seen in my life the gulf open, the gulf that's opened in American culture in general, as far as like, what do I want for this country, what do I want for the world, it exists between me and my husband's family. I don't talk to them about politics. I'm not going to say that I obey my own command on that one, but I do love them, and I'm not going to say it's easy always, but I have learned, I think, that love is an action and not necessarily a feeling, and that I can express my love for people who disagree with me, even if I'm not feeling it in that moment. I can listen. That's a way of expressing love. I can be of service. That's a way of expressing love. I can let go, which I do think is a way of expressing love sometimes. So yeah, it's a long answer, but yeah, definitely.
It'll be a long journey.
Yeah.
Well, my last question is just about the theme of our festival this year is Resist Easy Answers. And would love to hear any thoughts that you might have on how you think about what that means, or how you feel like that has impacted your life or your work.
I think that's a great theme, and
I think so too.
Yes, and it's particularly applicable to me when I think politics is the thing that I live most of the time. There are no easy answers in politics, and when people are looking at what's going on in our country right now, you resist the easy answers to explain what's happening. I mean, there's it's almost become a cliche. It has become a cliche and mockable to say things like Trump voters experience economic anxiety, but it's also an easy answer to say they're racists. You can be both, number one, and then also it's an easy answer to say just like one candidate was simply better than another. It's an easy answer to talk about, well, she should have spent more time in Wisconsin. Although I think that would have helped, but I think that in politics, if it's an easy answer, it's probably not true, and I think that probably is the case in most situations. And I think if you think something has an easy answer, that's another good cue to look in on yourself. What is it? If it feels easy, then maybe there's some preconception that it's hooking in on, and examine what that is.
That the easy answers are a place to kind of look deeper in ourselves first, even.
If it feels easy,
Yeah.
go
back
back
and
and
try
ask some
again.
more questions. If it's an easy answer, ask more questions.
Yeah.
There we go with
I
that.
like that.
All right.
Great. Well, we are so excited for your conversation with Jeff, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we'll continue to be in touch.
Yes. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.